using supply and demand. In this video, we're going to use the idea of supply and demand to figure out how to answer specific questions within economic scenarios. Whenever I'm doing supply and demand, I use 3 questions to help me guide answering my supply and demand problems. I'm going to offer you those 3 questions, and I'm going to tell you that if you use these 3 questions, supply and demand scenarios will become much easier. The first question I ask is, what is the market? So let's come up with a scenario. Let's say that the price of cheese decreases. What's going to happen in the market for pizza when the price of cheese decreases? Well, this is the only open-ended question we have on these 3 questions. So let's start out by drawing the answer. The answer is going to be, you draw these axes, price and quantity, you draw the supply curve, you draw the demand curve, you label equilibrium quantity 1, you label equilibrium price 1. You then label the entire market the market for pizza. That's the answer to the first question. Questions 2 and 3 are a lot easier because there's only 2 possible answers for both questions 2 and 2 possible answers for question 3. So the question 2 is, who does this impact? And there's only 2 answers. It can either impact the buyers or it can impact the sellers. How do we know if it impacts the buyers? We look to those demand determinants. We know it's either going to be the number of buyers. Well, is there somehow less buyers? Was there a plague that wiped out pizza eaters? Or it's going to be tastes and preferences. Well, nothing's changed there. Income hasn't changed. Price of related goods hasn't changed. Expected future prices changed? Well, none of the determinants of demand have changed. So why would the buyers be affected by this? They will be affected, but they're going to be affected through what happens to the suppliers. What is the price of cheese? When the price of cheese decreases, that's going to impact on the sellers. It's a direct determinant of supply. Input price. Third question. How does it impact them? Are they going to want to sell more or less pizzas? Well, if the price of cheese goes down, and I'm selling pizzas for $5 a slice, I can produce more pizzas for profit because the cheese prices have gone down. So I'm going to want to produce more pizzas. So the answer to 2 is sellers, and the answer to question 3 is more pizzas. So let's draw that out. We draw a new supply curve that's shifted to the right because it's an increase in supply. And then we label the new price and the new quantity equilibrium. So we now would say the price has gone down, the quantity has gone up. Or very simply, you could argue in the following manner. Because the price of cheese decreased, the supply for pizzas increased, leading to a lower price and a higher quantity of pizzas being sold. That's the answer. You could do this in multiple choice questions. You can do this on a short answer question. These are all very useful. If you know how to do these 3 questions, you know how to do this for a supply and demand scenario, you're going to get a lot of answers that you can use. Well, let's do a different scenario. Let's say, for example, pizzas cure cancer. Right? Pizza cures cancer. What's the market? The market is the market for pizzas. So notice that I start out with the supply increasing. I start out with the demand decreasing. I label P1 and Q1. Well, if pizzas cure cancer, question 2, who does this affect? Does it affect buyers or sellers? I'm not sure it affects sellers. It doesn't affect input prices, doesn't affect the number of sellers or any of the other determinants for supply in the sellers. What about demanders? Well, I have a preference not to have cancer. I have a preference for pizza to get rid of my cancer. So this is kind of a silly scenario, but it's going to affect the buyers. Are people going to want to buy more or less pizza when we find out that pizza cures cancer? Well, I'm going to guess it's going to affect the buyers, and they're going to want to buy more pizza. So we draw it out. The demand increases. We label P2 and Q2. At P2 and Q2, we see that the effect of a pizza curing cancer is that price goes up and the quantity of pizzas goes up as well. So that scenario is pretty simple as well. Let's do a third scenario. This third scenario is a little bit more complicated. In this third scenario, we're going to have two things going on. And it's going to happen at the same time. The first one is the government's going to place a tax on pizza at the same time as Vogue tells us that pizza is completely fashionable. Pizza is the most awesome thing that could possibly happen, right? Everyone should be eating pizza. So we got two things going on. And whenever we have two separate things going on, we're going to have two shifts. If only one thing goes on, you're only going to have one shift. So pizza cures cancer. One thing's going on, one shift. Price of cheese decreased, one shift. In this case, two shifts. First one, taxes on pizza. Who does it affect? Well, taxes is a determinant of supply. So who does it affect? It affects the sellers. Well, if they're placing a tax on pizza, how does it affect them? They're going to want to sell less. So let's draw that out. Market is the market for pizzas. Supply, demand, price 1, Q1. And then we say it affects the sellers. So we draw that out. We go to supply 2, which is a decrease in supply. As the government increases taxes, firms supply less pizza. We go from Q1 to Q2 and P1 to P2. So the tax raises the price of pizza, lowers the quantity of pizza being sold. But what about pizzas all of a sudden becoming fashionable? What about pizzas all of a sudden everyone wants to have pizzas because it just makes you so awesome. It makes you great. Well, who does that affect? That affects the buyers. Once again, in this case, tastes and preferences. I have a taste and a preference to be fashionable. So I'm going to want to buy more pizzas. That causes the demand to shift out. In which case, our quantity goes from Q2 to Q3, and our price goes from P2 to P3. Now, I want you to notice what's always going to happen with a double shift. With a double shift, either price or quantity is going to be unknown. In this case, Q1 to Q2 is a decrease in quantity, and then Q2 to Q3 is an increase in quantity. These are just sketches. We don't know the size of the changes in quantity. The way I've drawn it, the quantity is increased. But it could have been the quantity decreased, depending on how it... So, in short, we don't know what happens to quantity. We just don't know. On the other hand, we know that the price went up from P1 to P2. We know the price went up from P2 to P3. Because the price went up both times, we know for certain price went up. So your answer for this would be, because of the two changes, supply shifts to the left, demand shifts to the right, and we know that price is going to increase, but we're uncertain about what quantity is going to do. So that's how you can use supply and demand to answer all sorts of different questions. You're going to want to practice this. The more you practice it, the better you're going to get at that. But hopefully this has helped you get an idea of how to use supply and demand.